Washington Journal continues.
Tucker Carlson has founded a website 5 months old now called The Daily Caller, dailycaller.com. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us about The Daily Caller, first of all. What's your mission? What are you covering?
We're covering everything. It's a pretty comprehensive news site. It's a newspaper online. We've got a bunch of reporters. I can't even keep track of how many reporters we have. We have someone in the White House pool. We have people covering Congress, the agencies, Washington. We're based here. So we cover the government first and foremost, but we also, we've got sections, crime, sports, entertainment, health, everything. But really we cover politics mostly.
Mm-hmm. And why did you feel there was a need for this website? There are so many locations out there for folks to get their news. What are you doing that's different?
Well, there are a lot of locations to get news that has been recycled from other sources, that has been taken from newspapers and aggregated in one place online. And there's nothing wrong with that. There are lots of great aggregators out there, and I read them every morning. But there is a need for original reporting. There's less of it than there has been. Newspapers, which are the basic source, the source of reporting really in this country, are in trouble, obviously. A lot of them are going under. There are fewer reporters than there were 5 years ago, far fewer. And so I think there is still a need, and will remain a need for a long time, for more people going out and asking questions and providing primary news coverage, actually showing up at the event and writing about it. There's not enough of that.
The New York Times reported today that they've just done a recent poll with CBS that overwhelmingly Americans think the nation needs a fundamental overhaul of its energy policies, and most expect alternative forms to replace oil as a major source within 25 years. Yet a majority are unwilling to pay higher gasoline prices to help develop new fuel sources, and they're more concerned about jobs in the nation's economy than the ecological disaster in the Gulf and energy issues.
And not just higher gas prices, but higher energy prices generally, higher heating prices. Travel costs, they don't want to see those rise. I mean, cheap air travel is one of the reasons we're a prosperous, happy country. And you can have family in California and keep in touch with them. People don't want that to change. They will revolt, actually, if it changes. I think also people are unduly maybe optimistic about the time frame for switching over from fossil fuels to something new, whatever's next. That may be farther off than we think. And in fact, there is a lot of energy still, even domestically, left in this country. So it may be a while before we see, as far as I can tell, before we see a real revolution in the way we consume energy. But we can probably become more efficient and cleaner.
If you were in the administration or member of Congress, what would that tell you about a likely direction to pursue?
Well, I would, be, and they are, the people who run the country, the Democratic Party at this point, the leadership in Congress and the White House, they're very wary of any energy legislation that's going to affect the consumer directly, and almost all proposed legislation that I've seen would. There are plenty of examples what happens when people see their energy costs rise, and it's ugly. I mean, people pay a lot of taxes anyway in this country, but they're in some ways they're unseen. You have withholding. You don't know how much you're paying really week to week. But if your gas bill spikes $1 a gallon, holy smokes. People don't care for that at all, as you know.
What are you watching in this primary election season? The Tea Party's role in some of the congressional races, also gubernatorial races throughout the country. What are you reading from all of this?
Well, I mean, like everybody, we're trying to figure out what the Tea Party movement means, what it is, who runs it, what its demands are. We have a great reporter called Alex Pappas, who's pretty much covering the Tea Parties exclusively. And so a lot of my understanding of the Tea Parties is filtered through the lens of his stories. But my sense of the Tea Parties is it's still a diffuse movement. There is no leadership, famously. But it's pretty narrow in its focus. I kind of in the beginning expected the Tea Parties to fragment maybe more than they have. And to see various parties take up various causes and then wind up at odds with one another. But the movement, such as it is, seems focused pretty narrowly on spending, government spending, and the debt. And I think if they keep the focus there, they have a chance of really potentially affecting not just the midterm elections this fall, but the presidential election 2 years from now.
Let's go to the phones. We have Terry on our independent line in Appleton, Wisconsin. Good morning.
Hi. I'd like the speaker to draw some type of correlation between BP being private sector we're going to charge them for everything that's gone wrong. I mean, if you got your shoes dirty with oil, they're going to buy you a new pair of shoes. The banking, which is also private sector, all the jobs we've lost from them, the people who've lost their homes, and we bail them out, and then we give everybody who lost their job money from the government. Do you see any correlation, or do you see any contingency there that seems wrong to me?
I'm not sure I exactly follow the comparison, but the one thing the two examples you cited have in common is the expectation that a lot of Americans have that the government will step in the worst case scenario and make everything all right. That in the end, the government is kind of the mommy of last resort, and will make them whole when something bad happens. And I'm not criticizing that expectation, but in some cases it's unrealistic. I mean, there are some things that government can't do, that humans can't do, and one of them apparently is fix an oil leak a mile down. So, not to laugh about it, but that's clearly beyond the capability of the federal government or even of the oil company right now. And I think that's a shock for a lot of people, that there are some things our government can't do. People have been raised with very high expectations of what government can do, and they're unrealistic.
What is your reaction to Congressman Joe Barton's comments last week talking about the White House essentially shaking down BP?
Well, they did shake down BP. I mean, so the debate is whether that's a good thing or not. And you could certainly argue that it's good. I'm not even necessarily taking a position. I'm not even exactly sure what I think of it. But they definitely shook down BP, and I think it's completely valid to find that disturbing, to find it a bad precedent. You don't have to be a supporter of BP. It's an awfully annoying company, if I can say. But you can still be anxious about the precedent that's set when the administration sits down with any private citizen and says, give me money or else. That's, all civil libertarians should be uncomfortable with that. And so I think Barton, on principle, made a pretty good point. Obviously, it was unacceptable politically, and he was pounded by his party, which immediately abandoned him. There had been some conflicts between Barton and the leadership of his party previous to this. There is a history, a backstory to all this. But still, they ran away from him, and then, of course, forced him to get on TV in this sort of North Korean apology for the apology that was pretty disturbing. I would like to see at least somebody stand up and say, wait a second, Joe Barton personally aside, he makes an important point, and let's stand on principle. But that's something that politicians aren't into, obviously. And in this case, they weren't.
Republican caller Joe in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Welcome.
Hi, ma'am. Thank you for having my call this morning.
Go right ahead.
For C-SPAN. It's a great American justice for C-SPAN, I would like to say. And I would like to say for Obama, the Democrats are for the environment, and yet we got an oil leak here. And another thing I would like to say about the war in Iraq, he voted against the war in Iraq, and we still have our troops there. And I would like to say to Tucker, how would you estimate all these problems we're having in our country, and yet we can't find the solution to the problem? That's all I would like to say. Thank you, Tucker.
Well, that's a compound question if I've ever heard one. I'm not sure I can answer every element of it. I would say, yeah, there is on the surface an irony that under the watch of a Democratic president we have this environmental disaster. On the other hand, and I'm not saying this as a fervent Obama supporter, that's for certain, it's not his fault fundamentally. He didn't cause the oil spill. We need oil. If you drive a car or consume any product that's moved by truck, you're using, we all need oil, and there's no use lying about that. And offshore drilling, in a lot of cases, is a pretty good idea. This was an accident. It does seem a little unfair to jump down the throat of any politician for something that they didn't do. As for America's problems generally, yeah, they do seem to be adding up. You do get a kind of 1978 feel when you talk to people, like the country's on the wrong track.
And how is that significant? How do you see that playing out at the polls?
Well, I mean, the Democrats are going to be spanked for it fairly vigorously, and not in a good way. Yeah, of course they're going to be punished. They're the party in power, absolutely. The question is, will the Republicans be in a position to take advantage of Democratic weakness? And that's less clear. I mean, all midterms, of course, are a referendum on the party in power, and and Democrats are going to fail that test. And a lot of Democrats are going to lose. Unfortunately, from my point of view, the Democrats who will lose will mostly be the moderate Democrats. So the party will become, on whole, much more ideological, much more left-wing, I think, after this election. That's probably not good, but it's inevitable. But just because the Democrats are weak doesn't mean the Republicans are necessarily strong.
What would be assigned to you after the fall elections that the Republicans could not cash in, could not really make hay out of what you're talking about the Democrats' weakness
Right.
being? I mean, is it a matter of taking over the House? Is it a matter of catching the Senate? What would be failure by the Republicans?
Well, there are a couple different things you'd look at. Obviously, marginal races are the first measure. I mean, certain races, you know what's going to happen. In a wave election like this, as I said, the incumbent party is going to get hurt.